So the last thing we did before the break was this question of whether too much thinking injures the spleen. And I pointed out that thinking is a glorious human activity as long as we're in control of it and it's not in control of us. So if we can use thinking when we really need to think and not get distracted into thinking when really we need to be present. I mean, if we go for a walk, we might choose to use that walk to reflect, to think, and if we've chosen that, it's great. It's a shame if we go for a walk and actually we just have redundant and repetitive mental activity, but we don't ever look at the trees or feel the ground under our feet or notice what's around us, simply be there. So this is the thing about the emotions. It's not that any of them are inappropriate or wrong. As we'll see, the emphasis in the Chinese tradition is that emotions, and perhaps thinking doesn't seem like an emotion, but it's a mental activity. These are all an absolutely normal and essential part of being human. It's simply when we are the victim of them, we're not the master of them, that it becomes a problem. And being master of them doesn't mean over-controlling, as we'll see. So just going through a few more of the traditional list of harmful emotions, worry and anxiety. So this is, again, the book I mentioned right at the beginning, the Neye Inner Training, also published under the name Original Tao, one of the great lesser-known Taoist texts. Worry and grief generate illness. When you think about something and don't let go of it, internally you will be distressed, externally you will be weak. So that could relate to overthinking here. I've put it with worry and anxiety, and they're a little bit similar, aren't they? Excessive thinking, excessive worrying, and so on. Apprehension and anxiety, worries and concerns injure the spirit. Now, again, worry and anxiety is a useful evolutionary mental activity. Yes? If you lie awake at night, 100,000 years ago in your cave, thinking what will happen if the mammoth you're going to hunt tomorrow suddenly turns and attacks you, or unpredictable events happen, you rehearse them, you think of what might go wrong, how you might deal with it. That's useful. That's smart. Okay? It's again when it becomes fruitless, when it becomes negative, when it's a process we can't control. And this saps our chi, it damages our spirit. We might have financial worries. Maybe we can't avoid them, and yet we could say, well, there's a time to worry about them and a time to stop worrying about them. Yes? What's the point of constantly going over the same worry? It just is harmful to us. Worrying about things that can't be helped or prevented is fruitless. Others' opinions of us, there might be small worries, there might be so small that we don't notice them. They might be part of our background noise, you know, worrying about our bodies, about our appearance, about our clothes, about what other people think about us, all this really negative, wasting. This is the kind of thing that is included in excessive emotion. It's not just the big, swirling emotions. It's this background noise that prevents us from being fully alive and fully ourselves. Quite a lot of research on anxiety, certainly next to anger, the most researched emotion, and it's really bad for us. It disturbs sleep. And remember, sleep is one of the four legs of the chair of good health. It injures our digestion, that's another leg, the diet, another leg of the chair, and they've associated anxiety with chronic anxiety with a whole host of physical symptoms and disorders. Of 1,000 patients with heart disease, those with anxiety were twice as likely to die as those without. Healthy men with anxiety, significantly more likely to have heart attack within 12 years compared to those without. This is really harmful. On a low level, it's harmful because, as I say, it stops us being fully ourselves and fully alive. On a more extreme example, it threatens our life itself. So I just thought I'd review the origins of anxiety and worry, because another thing we learned from Dr. Shen, who I mentioned earlier, I asked Hugh about, is stages of life and when disease starts. And this is really important to understand our patients. It's also really important for prognosis. Right? It's really important that we pin down when this happened, because some things that have a very deep root cannot be cured. Okay? They're so deep-seated they cannot be cured. But if they can be explained to a patient, that can be half as good as curing it. Yeah? People have a grasp, an understanding of where this comes from. So would we agree that anxiety is very common? Yes? Do a lot of us suffer from anxiety? Yeah, we do. So it's very, very common. So where does it come from? Well, the first origin, as we've seen, is before birth. And this is particularly if, as we've seen, the mother has emotional shocks or herself suffers from anxiety or depression when she's pregnant. Yeah? So this can be the root. How do we know this is the original source? Because the baby will always be nervous. Yeah? The baby will have poor sleep, be an anxious baby. We all know, yes? Some babies, they're just incredibly peaceful. They're great, plump, happy babies. They sleep well. They grin at you from an early age. They only cry when there's a really genuine source. And other babies, I'm afraid, are the exact opposite. Yes, they're anxious, they're nervous, they're fearful. So we have to think, okay, this comes from a prenatal origin. Yeah? Then the second time, of course, that this can happen is during childhood. And again, we ask the question, when did this start? And people might remember. They might say, oh, my parents always said I was a very happy child until I was 8, or they remember. So what happens? Well, of course, we now really focus on this emotional and physical abuse. Right? Very common cause. Shock. That means a sudden acute shock. We'll look at that in a minute. Or extreme or continuous fear. Family pressure to behave in a certain way, not to behave in a certain way if it's very controlling. Bullying at school. And certain causes unique to Chinese medicine. So this is an important one. It's rare, but I personally have encountered it in practice. Somebody can have a high fever, often as a child, and after that they always suffer from insomnia or anxiety. In fact, there's even a prescription for it, but I can't. Now I'm not practicing, I'm losing my memory for prescriptions. There is a prescription that deals with this, and it's basically that the high fever, especially what happens in high fever, are there herbalists here? Any herbalists? Okay. So we study a bit in acupuncture, it's more important in herbs. During the course of a high fever, the fever can enter what's called the pericardium, yeah, which is the heart, but you're not allowed to call it the heart, because the heart is the emperor. Yes? There's a convention. This whole thing about the pericardium protects the heart. The emperor cannot be attacked. So even when it's clearly the heart, because somebody has hallucinations and they have crazy speech, we can't call it the heart, we call it the pericardium. So it's intense heat attacking the heart. And although the fever passes, the heart yin is injured. And for years afterwards, somebody can suffer from nervousness, insomnia, and anxiety. Now, these factors, it's really, again, important to understand, it's very obvious, these kind of childhood pressures will affect children more or less depending on the strength of their constitutional Shen. And this is obvious, we know this in life. People, let's think of adults as just the same. Adults can have the same experience. One will suffer continuous post-traumatic stress disorder, the other won't. Yes? You know, we see this in wars. We have recent wars. We pay attention, read things in the newspaper. A tank is blown up by an improvised explosive device. You know, 2 soldiers, their life is ruined. They have years of post-traumatic stress disorder. 1 or 2 others just walk through it unscathed emotionally. That is because of the strength of constitutional Shen. So some children, some adults will have very successful lives, will be very emotionally, seemingly centered and balanced, and then you find out had an absolutely appalling childhood. Yes? Terrible things in childhood, but it didn't ruin their lives. And other children will have similar events that completely affect the course of their life. That's down to constitutional strength of Shen. This we've talked about. This is the 3rd time where when people start going out from the home and living independent lives, this is more, as I said, a time when underlying potential for anxiety or for psychosis is revealed under the stress of growing into adulthood. And of course, adults suffer a lot of life experiences that can cause anxiety to develop, economic pressures, work pressures, emotional repression, shock, blood loss. You're familiar with this idea that when women particularly lose blood, for example, in childhood, it can weaken heart blood. So when heart blood is deficient, a person becomes more prone to being nervous and anxious. Very common pattern we see in women. The remedy Gui Pi Tang in Chinese herbal medicine strengthens the spleen, the source of blood, and nourishes and calms the heart. So identifying, if we have a patient who has insomnia, who has nervousness and anxiety, identifying when this started, what the life period this began, is very important for treatment. If it began in adulthood, for example, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is generally considered to be treatable. Not easy to treat, but it's treatable. Because it's new, it's fresh, it occurs in an adult. Yes? But if a child at the age of 3 has a terrible shock, yeah, that becomes much more deep-seated. It's like it's ingrained. It's a bit like you cut your initials in a very young tree, and they grow bigger and bigger and bigger as the tree grows bigger. Yeah? So that's a much more deep-seated cause and be much harder to treat in practice. It's a bit twee to quote Winnie the Pooh, but I do like this one. Supposing a tree fell down, Pooh, when we were underneath it. Supposing it didn't, said Pooh after careful thought. Piglet was comforted by this. So this is a very straightforward approach to anxiety. Yeah? Teaching ourselves to think, well, actually, yeah, that might not happen. End of. Don't need to worry about that anymore. Yeah? What we're going to be talking about is developing the kind of mind that can do that. It's simply developing a mind where we are not helpless. We're not helpless in the face of these thoughts and emotions that are an inevitable part of being human. Yeah? And we're going to look at ways that we can actually improve our ability to deal with them.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
To go back to some of the research papers that you were quoting about the heart and strokes with anger and with the anxiety.
Yeah.
all the research for Western medicine, all that you quoted were for men. Where are any studies that relate to women, and does the ancient texts make a differentiation between male and female, or are we one? Because a lot of those studies you quoted, the medicines that they give, or some of the heart stuff, has no impact on women because of our hormones, or the little bit of work on research that I've done on it.
Can you hear the question? At the back, did you hear the question? Yes, no?
No.
Yes, no. Okay. The question is the predominance of the research on anger being related to men and not to women. I hadn't noticed that. Apologies. I just deal with the research that I find. I don't know, maybe that they research men because they think, oh, men are much more anger prone. I don't know. We will. There is, there is lots of research on women as well. Maybe not specifically on anger. So I don't know the answer to that. We can look at.
And what about the old texts?
The old texts, I don't think they didn't talk about women much. Look, let's face the reality is that the Yangsheng tradition was predominantly concerned with men, and it was predominantly concerned with upper class men. The Yangsheng tradition is for men who have enough time and wealth to devote themselves to cultivating their spirit, cultivating their health, learning how to manage numerous wives and concubines. They're not. It doesn't mean that it isn't full of smart stuff. It is. It really is. But it's of its culture. So I don't think I don't think a conscious difference is made. They don't say, oh, men are prone to this and women aren't. Not in this respect. They just don't talk about women. Sun Tzu Miao did, of course. So Sun Tzu Miao was quite radical. Sun Tzu Miao and his whatever it's called, 1,000 gold pieces, started with women. Yeah? He put women at the very start of it. He said women are the source of life and the source of the family. And so matters concerning women come first. And he really laid down the really strong basis of gynecology, of obstetrics, of care of the newborn, and so on. So that was really radical for its time. But, it was still a male-dominated culture. Fear. Fear and fright. They're slightly different. Fear is constant, chronic, slowly eats away at the soul. It can be from real threats, long-term threats, again, abuse, bullying, social or political oppression, poverty, and so on. And it can become so deep-seated that it becomes invisible. Now, in children, it can cause this pattern which is not always given enough emphasis in Chinese medicine. So just to remind you, because I think it's an important pattern. Are you familiar with this gallbladder qi deficiency? Okay. So the way it's described in the books is a person who has gallbladder qi deficiency is very timid. They're easily scared, they're easily frightened, they're easily startled even. And they're very indecisive. They can't make up their minds, can't make decisions easily. They're also unable to get angry. Generally, they might be a bit irritable, but they can't connect with true anger. And it has two forms, two similar but different forms. The first comes from chronic fear and oppression in childhood. In childhood, if using, I understand this is quite a 5-elementy conference this year, so if in childhood wood is not allowed to grow, and what do we mean by wood? We mean self-assertion. Yes? The child is not allowed to make connection with that assertiveness, but they're constantly put down by parents. The wood is constantly cut off at its source. They're humiliated, they're ridiculed, and so on. Then the wood never grows. That wood, that assertiveness, that strength of self never grows, and the person becomes timid, unassertive, fearful, and indecisive. And what's interesting about these people, in my experience, is in us they evoke a feeling of irritation or anger. That's very, very common. There's something about them, and we can feel it, it's totally inappropriate. They might be telling me this, or telling you this terrible story of misfortune, and then this terrible thing happened, and that terrible thing happened. And logically, you should be weeping with compassion, and instead of which you're struggling to contain your frustration and anger, because you're doing what they're not able to do. Yeah. But the second type. So where else do we see fearfulness, timidity? Actually, another symptom: inability to sleep alone, inability to leave the house, from acute fright. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. No?
Why gallbladder and not kidney?
Well, actually, funny enough, it's got two names. So one is Chi deficiency of the gallbladder and heart, and the other is shock injures the kidney. It's the same pattern. But I think the gallbladder one is more important because, I don't know, it's certainly in the kind of internal martial training I do, this idea of gallbladder is really important. This is our healthy assertiveness, yes? Our ability to really connect with life and really drive into life where it's needed, where it's appropriate. So in adults, yeah, this comes from acute shock or acute fright, but it's the same pattern. Same pattern manifesting in a slightly different way. And again, we get these wise words of wisdom that we've talked about. If the chi of the heart and gallbladder is strong, that means if congenitally we've got strong shen, strong spirit, even sudden fright and danger won't harm us. Yes? Mrs. Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher being blown up, that would be enough to send most of us into therapy for months or years. She just shrugged it off. Actually, soon after that, I don't know if you remember, about a few months or a year or two, the IRA drove a white van somewhere near Downing Street and launched a pissy little mortar, not a big deal, into the garden of number 10 Downing Street when there was a cabinet meeting going on. And afterwards, interviewed on television, all these ministers could hardly speak hours later. They were so shocked. So they didn't have the strength of constitutional shen that Thatcher did. So even if there's sudden fright, trauma, shock, if the shen is strong, it won't be injured. Stress. I'm not sure what that says, whether it's important, but this is probably a reasonable, good short-term remedy for stress, isn't it? Perhaps that explains what to me is the mystery of the appeal of the Great British Bake Off. Maybe it's a great big medicinal, uniquely British medicinal process, of cake making. So what they call stress is very much researched nowadays. And they'll tell you that stress causes depression, insomnia, infertility, headache, premature aging. So, for example, do you know about telomeres? Do you know? Yeah. Telomeres are, oh God, somebody help me out here. They're the ends of DNA strands. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So they're the end. they're the ends of DNA strands that get sliced every time we replicate. But they are a reliable sign of biological aging. So can you imagine the fun people have looking at telomeres? Now, you can do lots of interesting research. So, for example, they take twins who are going to have, in theory, identical telomeres, and then one twin will be eat rubbish and not take any exercise, and the other twin lives a healthy life, and they look at their telomeres, and the healthy twin will be biologically 10 years younger than the unhealthy twin. So it's very clear demonstration that if we do things that are good for us, it really does make a difference, and also they're a very good research tool. So when they say premature aging here, they mean they've observed that stress will reduce the length of the telomeres and thus result in people being biologically older. Okay, now this is quite interesting for me. One of my favourite sayings, the last creature to discover water is the fish. We don't see clearly the sea that we swim in. So what does this mean? Well, actually, it means several things. Two things that are, for me, is important. It has relation to family patterns. So we know that all families tend to have emotional patterns and idea patterns that we inherit. Do you remember that wonderful poem, They Fuck You Up, Your Mum and Dad? They may not mean to, but they do. And it says, man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. So we get, whether we like it or, incidentally, Adrian Mitchell, I think he was a Liverpool poet, wrote a riposte. They tuck you up, your mum and dad, and redo Peter Rabbit too. We inherit a lot of baggage, a lot of emotional baggage, how we see the world and how we perceive the world, and we don't even know it's there, because it was the family sea that we swam in. And part of the therapeutic process and the great courage required in therapy is to see what's going on, to actually see this. It's very hard. It's hard to see. And that's one way we evolve, is by seeing the emotional and thinking patterns we've inherited unconsciously from our family that have been handed down through our various families. And the second one is more immediate. I used to have patients who, from questioning and taking their pulse, I was convinced, I could feel they were very, very stressed or whatever. And I'd say, are you stressed? Do you think you're stressed? They go, all right, I don't think so, no. And I say, well, what do your family say about you? Oh, they're always telling me to slow down. They're always, because people can't see themselves. So that's why write down the advice of him who loves you, though you like it not at present. Yes? We must listen. We must try and see the sea that we swim in, and we must listen to what people tell us. Honest criticism is hard to take, particularly from a relative, friend, or an acquaintance, or a stranger. So this, I think that this ability for us to honestly see ourselves is part of the secret of self-realization. Yes? It's a vital part, and it's part of seeing what is. The challenge in life is to see what really is, to see how things really are, which is wisdom. I'm a great believer. You see, we can eat well, and we can exercise well, and we can sleep well, and we can cultivate our physical health in all kinds of ways. But the fact is, inevitably, we are all going to get old and die. And that's not a very nice process. I've been witnessing it very close up in the last few weeks, as I'm sure lots of us have, watching an old person die, and it's a pretty grim process, and that is kind of our lot. I mean, we might go suddenly, but we're definitely going to decline. Yes, our eyes are going to get weaker, and our hearing is going to get weaker, and our stamina is going to get weaker, and we're going to lose our fertility, and our body's going to get sore and achy, and we won't sleep so well, and we'll lose our appetite. It's pretty grim stuff. This is reality. So, because everything declines, but one thing can grow. One thing can grow right up to the very last moments of life, and that's wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge of life, but it doesn't come just by aging. My God, a lot of really stupid old people, aren't there? Cantankerous, stuck, stubborn, haven't changed their minds about anything since they were 27. Yeah? I'm talking about cultivating, constantly looking at life, constantly looking at oneself, developing a clear eye to see how things really are, and therefore changing, constantly developing. That's a challenge, but that results in wisdom. As Maya Angelou said, wisdom comes with age, but only if you're paying attention. Yeah? So to me, this is part of Yang Shan. Okay, now Sun Simiao pretty much laid it on the line. He could be rather strict sometimes. Here's his recipe. Avoid anxiety and worrying, anger, sorrow, grief, fear, jumping about, too many words, laughing too much. Yes? Constantly reduce your thoughts, ideas, desires, worldly affairs, speaking, laughter, worry, joy, happiness, anger, likes and dislikes. Old bastard. However, so that is, that's a rather extreme version, but that is the kind of part of the message you get in the Yangshan tradition. Particularly, reduce your desires. Don't let your constant, I want that. Unless I have that, I won't be happy. I want that. Not just things. I want a better partner. I don't know. Think of all the things that we want, that we crave for, or we desire. Constantly reduce them. Actually, there was this idea, almost, as far as I can understand it, I'm sure Elizabeth would know more about this, that this idea that when you have a desire for something, I desire this, something leaves my spirit and goes out of my body to that, and I lose Shen. I actually lose spirit by wanting that. That's the kind of idea I think they're saying. So I'm not saying don't do any, I'm only saying this is what they say, this is what Sun Simiao says. But if we did follow that, what's the payoff? You see, we like passion, don't we? We're Western. What's our idea of an artist? Yeah? We don't want an artist. We don't want a writer or a musician or a painter who's calm and serene and stuff. All the best albums come from divorce and pain, don't they? All the best music and popular music, all the best art comes from strife and agony and stuff like that. We don't want happy artists. So we're kind of in love with passion. We're in love with intensity of life. So it's very hard for us as Westerners to hear a message that actually we need to reduce that. We need to move away from that. But if we thought, well, that's an interesting idea, what would the payoff be? There must be some reward for that. What is the payoff? It's this from the Neya. Where essence is stored, there's spontaneous life. Externally, it blooms in contentment. Internally, it's stored as a wellspring. Okay? Does that make sense? Does anybody here meditate or do yoga or do Tai Chi or Qigong? Yeah, good. Lots of us. Okay. So we all have the experience, I think. If you have a regular practice, or perhaps a bit of an irregular practice, and you do your practice one day, for example, and bloody hell, it's deep, it's rich, you do it, and you think, actually, this is the best thing there is. Yeah? This is actually better than anything else I do. This feels better. Okay? It's just sort of deeply rewarding, internally a wellspring, essence is stored. And then we get up from our practice, we feel really connected. We say to ourselves, actually, this is so good, I must be in this state all the time, or I must do this every day. And then in 5 minutes, we're arguing with somebody on the phone, or we're, you know, struggling not to eat that second bar of chocolate, or whatever it is, and so on. It's the idea that this is better than that. This is more rewarding than that. That's really part of what Yang Sheng is teaching. And we don't have to become monks. We can decide how much we want to practice that idea. But that internal self-cultivation, dwelling in the present, and we'll look soon, I hope, I can't remember how many more slides, we'll look at the practice. This is what's deeply rewarding. Right? This is the payoff. It means that one's emotions are acted out in an appropriate and balanced fashion. What could cause damage when things in the universe harmoniously resonate with each other like this? But if we anticipate something before it's actually happened, or if we stay attached to it, although the situation has passed, that means we become stuck in joyous anger, joy, anger, worry, and so on. And the heart-mind doesn't return to a balanced state. Simple, obvious. A sage is not a man who's without emotions. A sage is a man who is master of his emotions and keeps calmness of mind. American poet, this is, for example, with anger, American poet Emily Dickinson, anger as soon as fed is dead, 'tis starving makes it fat. That means if we sit on our anger, it grows. If we express it appropriately, that's normal. If we feel it appropriately, it's normal. And William Blake, I was angry with my friend, I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe, I told it not, my wrath did grow. So this is appropriate expression of anger, and this is inappropriate repression of anger. Yeah? So, I'm sure we've got a female one coming up. You've got me worried now. I think it's just because men are considered to be bloody angry, and that's why they research anger on men. So, men with moderate levels of anger expression are much less likely to suffer heart attacks or strokes than men with low levels of anger expression. So we've seen how excessive anger causes heart attacks and strokes. And now we see that if men hold their anger in, are not appropriately able to express it, that also causes heart attacks and strokes. That's why I say it's a fine line we have to tread. Bottling up anger is more likely to induce a headache than being depressed or anxious, and is the biggest predictor of headaches among 171 headache patients studied. I don't know if you can see that. This is the Institute for the Study of Emotional Stress. This is the researcher, and this says, hey, I feel better already. So, Gary Larson. Okay, so now we move on to practice, if you like, or the theory of practice. We're not actually going to practice. The ability to be in the present moment is a major component of mental wellness. This is Maslow. You know Maslow? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know those ones. What's the hierarchy of needs? Anybody know? Food, shelter, sex, central eating. And according to it, sorry. Wi-Fi. Well, actually, according to one book, the fifth one is changing one's consciousness. And it's a book written by somebody that every single culture in the history of the world has had ways of dramatically changing their consciousness. Alcohol, drugs, trance, dancing, whatever. Yeah. However, now this, I like this, I have to say. I remember this from when I was more of a studying Buddhism. And it's an image that's used, it's the image of the mirror or the lake. And it's used a lot in Taoism and Buddhism. The mind of the perfect man is like a mirror, or a lake, they'll say. And of course, when they talk about a lake, they say, there's this lake, this calm lake, and the clouds pass overhead, and the lake doesn't anticipate the clouds, but when they come, it reflects them. And when the clouds pass, it doesn't hang on to them. And it's the same with a mirror. It doesn't move with things, and nor does it anticipate them. It responds to them, but it doesn't hold on to them. Therefore, the perfect man is able to deal successfully with things, but is not affected by them. Of course, this is setting the bar very high, but it's good to set the bar high. We may not achieve the height of the bar, but it's direction to work towards. And again, the sage is like a mirror. He neither sees things off nor goes out to meet them. He responds to everything without storing anything up. Thus, he is never injured through the myriad transformations he undergoes. So, going back to your question was, or your comment, was the fear that detachment from the emotions makes us less alive, wasn't it? That's really what you were saying. Cold fish. We become cold fish. Yeah? And, well, first of all, we're all going to have different emotional patterns. Yes? Some of us are going to be more warmly emotional than others because of background and family and culture and so on. What might be a normal emotional expression in a Turkish Jewish family is going to be very different in, 7th generation English aristocracy. Yeah, just is, that's culture and everything. But, so we're all going to be a bit different. But the image is not that we don't feel the emotions. When the emotions come, we feel them. Yeah? Like a mirror reflects something. Yeah? We feel it. We might feel it intensely. Yes? We might feel intensely angry. We might feel intense grief. But we don't hang on to it. Yeah? We let it pass through like the clouds pass over. We don't deny it. We don't suppress it. We don't hang on to it. And the second thing is, as we'll see in a moment, we develop the ability to... So what does detachment mean? Detachment is not a nice word, is it? It's almost like repression. But when an emotion arises, we can create the ability to have a few moments or a moment to decide how much we're going to get caught up in it. I mean, I'll give you an example. I went to the train station today and I decided to buy some chewing gum. So there's this guy there. Now, I've noticed him before. He's quite sort of uptight. And I bought a couple of things of chewing gum, and I gave him, I said, I'm sorry, mate, I haven't got any change. I have to give you a note. And I said, oh, I haven't got a small note, I've got 20 quid. I mean, this guy, he got so angry, got so frustrated. Actually got frustrated. I was standing there, sort of putting my change away, and I heard him go, like this. And it was really emanating this terrific stress and frustration and stuff. And actually I said to him, what's the matter? Are you pissed off? He says, it's morning, I don't have that much change, I'm not made of money, Pardon? Anyway, I paid for it. So I said, I'll tell you what, take your chewing gum back and give me my money back. He said, no, I'm not doing that. So this whole episode, he put himself under intense and severe stress because something that's not worth wasting a bloody second about, is it? And he couldn't help himself. So what we're looking to, he immediately got caught up. He immediately bought the package of feeling pissed off and frustrated. So what we're looking for is a bit of space, to create a bit of space where we can sort of decide how much do we want to get caught up in this, or how much do we just want to let this go. And there have been times in my life I would have really picked a fight with him. I wouldn't have had a physical fight, but I would have really engaged with him. And this time I felt serene and wise and smart and superior. It was much nicer, much more fun than getting into a fight with him. So, you know, I felt really sorry for him. He's going to kill himself, undoubtedly. I've seen him, I've watched him. This is how he deals with life. He's going to have a heart attack or a stroke, undoubtedly, within a few years. Now, the Dalai Lama talks about patience. It's a word, but maybe it's not quite the right word, I think, but what he says is patience enables us to exercise discernment even in the heat of difficult situations. It gives us inner space. Within that space, we gain a degree of self-control, which allows us to respond to situations in an appropriate and compassionate manner, rather than being driven by anger or irritation, or any of the other emotions. Yes? So it's that inner, a bit of space, a bit of time, that is interesting to look at. I'm going to skip that. So how do we develop this? Yes? Well, the most effective and practical way, we know from masses of research, and this is the way it's always been taught in the Yang Shang tradition, is we quieten our mind, we still our mind. Yes? We bring our mind to a state of quietness through meditation. What's the buzzword now? Mindfulness. Yes, mindfulness. We can do it. Prayer, perhaps. We can do it in Qigong. We can do it in yoga. We can actually do it in everything, in anything. Yes, we can do it in every single thing that we do. But these are particularly concentrated ways of working with the mind. The gentleman harmonizes the sensations in his body. He calms his desires and puts an end to all negativity. He develops tranquility of spirit. And this is again setting the bar high. In order to cultivate the art of nourishing life, we have to meditate. During everything we do, walking, standing, eating, drinking, sleeping and resting, one must continually meditate. That means continuously be present. Be here in what we're doing, be present in what we're doing. Otherwise, apart from anything else, life passes like a dream. Nothing is real. No? Do you ever get that feeling? No? Because we're not really fully here. One always preserves one's essence and breath in their entirety. Now that's, again, I repeat, that sets the bar very high, and I mean, it's unlikely we're going to achieve that. So, meditation. What would it be called? Neuroscience, I guess, brain research has revealed over the last 2 or 3 decades is that the brain is plastic. That means it changes. I remember one of the first times I heard that, and it's probably something you've all heard, is when London taxi drivers used to do the knowledge. You know the knowledge? Maybe they don't do it anymore. Maybe it's all sat-nav. But they'd have to learn this enormous amount of information about every street in London and the best routes to go from A to B in one-way streets. It's really massive. When they looked at their brains, they found that parts of their brains had actually grown in size. So they're doing and have done over the last decade, 15 years, research on meditation. And they've found all kinds of changes in the brain when people meditate. So for example, this study, this folding, this walnut-shaped folding, is called gyrification. And when people meditate, they get increased joyification. And the more they've meditated, and the longer they've meditated, the more the brain changes. And in certain regions of the brain, this change in shape is likely, they say, to enhance awareness, emotional control, and self-regulation. Self-regulation. That's their term for being able to decide how much we get caught up in emotions. This is rather lengthy, but again, another piece of research. Long-term meditators had larger volumes and regions of the brain associated with emotional regulation and response control. And they say that larger volumes in these regions might account for meditators' ability to cultivate positive emotions, retain emotional stability, which I think is really important, and engage in mindful behavior. This is an old study that showed that transcendental meditation relaxes and opens the blood vessels, therefore encouraging what? What did we talk about earlier, definition of health? Free flow. So obviously, we in Chinese medicine, we talk about a healthy state of the body, we say free flow of qi and blood. Western medicine, they don't have qi, but they have the idea of free flow of blood. It's terribly important. Every cell in the body has to be nourished by blood, and in order to do that, the blood vessels have to be soft and relaxed to allow the blood to flow through. You have to have vasodilation and really effective microcirculation. "60,000 miles of blood vessels in the body. So how do we keep those blood vessels relaxed and free so that everything can flow? Well, we know meditation promotes vasodilation, relaxation, not repressing emotions vasodilates, exercise, sex, tea, what else? Any other ideas? Sorry? Sleep.
Communities.
That probably does, doesn't it? Hugging, contact, and laughter. Laughing. Yeah. I'm going to sort of go a bit fast through some things so we don't completely run out of time. This is just from meditation research, the physical benefits of meditation, the benefits of blood pressure, strengthening the immune system, and so on. It's the practice of meditation, practice becoming healthy, you become healthy. Practice love and compassion, you become more loving and compassionate. This is training for the mind and the emotions. That's what it is. I'm going to skip that. Okay. Yes. Before we get into laughter, anything about the meditation? Any questions or comments? Okay. Chinese saying, laughter makes you 10 years younger, distress causes your hair to become grey. Anger speeds up aging, laughter makes you younger. We know laughing promotes vasodilation. They, for example, showed volunteers film clips. When they showed them comedy clips, they vasodilated. When they showed them clips of violent films, their blood vessels contracted. Yes? When they interchanged them, their blood vessels had a really good workout. Expand, contract, expand, contract. Yes, do you know this? Who here earns a decent part of their living treating IVF? Yes, half of us. Okay. And we know this came about. We know how the history of this. This came from, was it Paulus, the Paulus research originally? Research that showed, and although there's been controversy about it, broadly speaking, there's a reasonable body of research that shows that women who have acupuncture before embryo implantation have more successful implantations than women without acupuncture. Although it's not clear whether, is it clear whether the take-home baby rate is any better? Does anybody know? We don't know. Okay. And it's about, up to a maximum of 50% improvement. So it's quite interesting that we have a study here from Israel that when they took clowns in to the IVF clinic and presumably got the women laughing, they had about the same level of improvement. Right? Clowns and acupuncture. So what do they have in common? They vasodilate. They vasodilate. We know acupuncture does that. It relaxes. That's one of the instant effects of acupuncture. It relaxes, softens, and smooths, and the blood vessels relax, and you get better blood flow through the uterus.
Can I just ask if there's any evidence that it enhances delivery? But the anecdotal thing is that my husband was born because we got blood from rather than by cesarean.
Oh, okay. No, I've never seen that. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? Show women in labour comedies. I don't fucking want to watch that! Turn it off! Excuse my language, I apologise. And this has led me to reflect on an interesting phenomenon, which, when I did my, I used to lecture on male diseases, and that got me interested in human mating behaviour, and I've read a lot of stuff around that, and of course it's terribly interesting for me to discover how a lot of what we think is conscious behaviour is actually biology. Okay? But, so one of the things in human mating behaviour is, what do women find attractive in men? Okay? Now we know women are quite attracted to physical qualities in men. They don't always say so. They try and deny that they have the same kind of shallow minds that men have, but research indicates actually they do. When women... Oh, okay. It's just popped out. Thanks. When they put cameras on women's eyes, young women sitting above, tracking their eye movements, when reasonably good-looking guys came into the bar, their eyes did a quick scan. Bums, crotch, eyes. Or face last. So I don't want to hear any more comments about guys looking down women's dresses. It's the same. Okay. So they do like, nice tight bums, and and of course they like wealth. As somebody said to Bernie Ecclestone about to his beautiful wife, said, what was it about this short, ugly, incredibly rich multimillionaire that attracted you? But what comes nearly always at the top of the list, or very near? Sense of humour. Sense of humour. Now, if we find broadly something attractive in the opposite sex, if you're straight, there must be a biological reason for it. It's not random. It's an evolutionary thing. So, what is it about a sense of humour that could be of biological advantage to women?
Makes you vasodilate and more fertile.
Exactly. Encourages fertility. Encourages conception. That's my theory, but it seems pretty obvious to me. So, try a few jokes. And I think I've got Scotland's favourite joke, which is actually one of my favourite jokes. It's actually a Bob Monkhouse joke. Remember Bob Monkhouse?
Yeah.
It says, when I die, I'd like to go peacefully in my sleep like my father, not screaming with terror like his passengers. Okay. Yes, anybody pregnant yet? Sorry. This is bad taste, sorry.
Ask me tomorrow.
So we've looked at how to manage and control the emotions and the mind through the practice of meditation. We looked at the importance of laughter, and now we find in Yangshan texts constantly reference to how important generosity is. This is Ge Hong, the master who embraces simplicity. That's his other name, Bao Puzi. He was an alchemist and a Yangshan cultivator and a seeker of immortality who actually only managed to live to the age of 60, although he may have transcended and gone up to heaven, I don't know. Always reside in openness and generosity. Then the body will be calm and disasters won't happen to you. So in general, those who are generous and laid back, that's obviously a modern translation, live long. Those who are stingy and uptight die young. It's the difference between being relaxed and at ease versus laboured and tight-fisted. Huh? So is this true?
No, I know a lot of people at a time.
Yeah, but they would have been older. Because look, it is true. Well,
I think bitterness can keep people going.
there are those stories, aren't there? The kind of the two really old women in the village who have bitterly hated each other for 70 years, and they just go on and on. The moment one dies, the other dies. There's nothing to live for. Yeah. However, exceptions apart, there's quite a few studies of this. They studied a bunch of older couples and followed them for a number of years. Those who were generous, in other words, those who were engaged in helping other people, lived longer. Fewer of them died. Very, very simple. They've done all this research with college students. I don't know if you've seen it. They give them $20 and tell them to go out and do exactly what they like with it and come back at the end of the day, and they do a psychological profile before and afterwards. And they simply find that those people who gave the money away are much happier at the end of the day than those people who bought something. This other study, volunteering by older adults resulted in a 47% reduced death rate. So it does seem to be true, despite your experience with mean, tight-fisted cantankerous. It's not personal, is it? No. Okay.
Well, that ties into the study you were talking about before, about being active, isn't it?
Well,
It's not volunteering, you know, they work in a charity shop or whatever.
oh, I think it is.
So they become more active.
Oh, I don't think it, no, I would say it's not the physical activity. There's such a difference, enormous difference between sitting at home watching daytime television and being out. Don't we feel something when we give? Isn't giving an incredibly potent thing? I think it's really powerful. So, well, all right. If you want to put it down to activity,
Well,
you
no, not, I'm just saying.
mean, ungenerous.
Yeah, there's a parallel, isn't it? That's what I'm saying. There's a parallel.
Yes. Well, let's call it engaged with life then. Yeah, as always, people always go, oh. I must say, I wouldn't hug a Siberian tiger myself. Look, this is very sweet. This is Confucius. When two people are at one in their inmost hearts, they shatter even the strength of iron and bronze. And when two people understand each other in their inmost hearts, their words are sweet and strong like the fragrance of orchids. Yes? I read that out at my nephew's wedding the other day. Now, the Chinese Yangsheng tradition doesn't talk much about intimacy. And what it doesn't talk about at all that I've come across is loneliness. Why do you think that is?
Because in those days, they had much tighter communities, much smaller communities.
Well, it's not just in those days, or, you know, there's this great thing on YouTube. It's really interesting. There's a couple of young American Chinese, a guy and a girl, you know, teenagers or a bit older, and she says to him, what are you doing this summer? He says, I go to China. She says, oh, have you got relatives there? And he says, yeah, I've got a bunch of relatives. And she says, well, what are you going to call them? And he says, well, I don't know, you know, auntie and uncle. And she says, no, you don't know anything. And then very increasingly rapidly, she sketches out traditional Chinese family relations. Because every single person within your vast family network, including your brother's, child's, husband's second sister, has got a specific name, you know, a specific title. Because people are embedded in this vast knitted network of family relationships. So you call your male cousins differently from your female cousins. They've got a status, they've got a name, and their spouses, the second sister of your first cousin, will have a status. So people are embedded in family. And in China, traditional China, you find it, I found this in India too, you're never alone. You simply, you know, you yearn to be alone, you know. And so Taoists were always, Chinese painters always painted pictures of hermits in solitary caves. You know, because the only place you could ever be alone is climb a sodding mountain and live in a cave. So loneliness, you know, and we might say, oh yes, we know existentially you can be alone in the midst of family, and that's true, of course. Yeah? Ultimately, we're all alone when we die. Yeah? But culturally, I don't think loneliness was an issue. That's my impression. Nothing like it is here. Dean Ornish, I don't know if you know Dean Ornish, he was a cardiologist, actually. I think he was a heart surgeon who became more interested in the emotional contribution to heart disease than physical, and now he's a kind of slightly new agey kind of person. There's no other factor in medicine, not diet, not smoking, not exercise, not stress, not genetics, not drugs, not surgery, that has a greater impact on illness and so on than loneliness and isolation. Yeah? And we live in a culture now where loneliness and isolation are endemic, especially when you're old. Yes? Constantly research among old people shows the biggest problem in their lives is not failing eyesight, and it's not arthritis, it's loneliness and the depression that comes from loneliness. So lonely people are more likely to have terrible health behaviors, die younger, have more cancer, have more immune system inflammation, and this, of course, is terribly important. As they get old, they're more likely to suffer from dementia and Alzheimer's. And when I give my normal Yangsheng lecture, which covers everything, not just emotions, I say, you know, the modern world is faced with an awful series of health epidemics. Yeah? Every single country in government, in the health departments, they're panicking about what's happening because we have a worldwide increase in what? dementia, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and the other big one, obesity with diabetes, cancer. And everywhere Western culture spreads, all these diseases go up. Okay? So if we take all societies now, but particularly more developed societies, the rise in dementia is absolutely astronomical. Partly because people are living longer, but partly, or very much, that people are living, they've got a much longer unhealthy part of their life. And we know that dementia, all right, it may be, we can't say absolutely dementia can be prevented, but we do know there are lots of things that can help prevent dementia, and what are they? It's simple. Eat well, exercise well, have good relationships. Use your brain. You know, dementia can be the same as diabetes, the same as obesity and cancer. Lifestyle dramatically, significantly can reduce the risk. But we face a terrible health crisis because, you know, if you have 2 million people hospitalized or in homes with dementia, what does that cost? Huh? What's the cost to society? It's untenable. Okay. Nearly the end. So, it's the conclusion of cultivating the mind and emotions. I said it came first. And this is what I've said before. However well we look after ourselves, inevitably we have to experience old age, sickness and death. And we have to be, in some way, emotionally and spiritually equipped to deal with them, to accept that. And that is wisdom. For human beings who have the curse of, we suffer from the curse of knowing that we're going to die. Huh? This is a terrible challenge. Okay, if you believe in Santa Claus in the sky, as clearly I don't, or I wouldn't have put it that way, you have some cop-out. Yeah? But if you don't, so if you don't think that there's a kind of heaven that you're going to go to, or some kind of afterlife where you stay yourself, this is a terrific challenge. It's extinction, the extinction of ourself. And we can shut our eyes to it, we can ignore it, we can face it head on, and we can try and develop some level of wisdom that encompasses it, that holds death as part of ourselves and part of our lives. This is a big challenge for humans. Okay? So that's one reason why cultivation of the mind and emotion comes first. The second is that the search for health and vigor can be narcissistic. And it can actually be dangerous. I mean, who does it ring a bell? Who were really into the outdoor life and pure air and pure water and vegetables? The Nazis. Yes. Its healthy lifestyle is, shall we say, politically neutral. It can go with lovely, compassionate people. It can go with Nazis. Unless we develop, along with looking after the body and the diet, yes, they're terribly important, unless we also develop compassion, empathy, friendliness, connectedness, then they can be harmful. And also, it's not really part of this, but it's been on my mind recently, a lot, old age. You know, it is part of cultivating ourselves and cultivating our minds and emotions. It's difficult. To deal with old age is difficult. Actually, what's her name? Was it Betty Davis? Who's a film actress? Yeah. Growing old is not for sissies, she said. That's true. So I'm not giving any answers. But I quoted part of this. So let's just get that. You'll get that on the handout if you want. So, and here's just something, this is the last slide. The great puzzle of death. Zhuangzi, you know the Zhuangzi? So there were basically, it used to be thought there were two actual people, great Taoist sages. There was Lao Tzu and there was Zhuangzi. Lao Tzu is almost certainly not a real person. Zhuangzi probably was. And the inner chapters of Zhuangzi are really fascinating. You know, they're quite difficult to understand sometimes, but they're fascinating. And this what I think about dying, I think is described here, although I don't always understand it. But I love this, is typical of the way Zhuangzi talks. Dimwits don't understand that no matter how one hides small things in larger things, there's always a chance of losing them. That means if you hold to a small life and try and kind of hide it, perhaps hide's not the right word, perhaps say hang on to it, in the midst of big things, which is everything, the Tao, the universe, you're going to lose it. Yeah? But if you hide the universe in the universe, there's no way to lose it. What does that mean? To me, what it means is, you know, when I stand in Qigong most mornings, and of course, being normal, sometimes my head's full of this, and sometimes it's full of that, and sometimes I kind of disappear. And I'm simply part of everything that there is. Yes? Everything, everything. The great Tao. Yeah? There's no difference between that and this. Yes? And then I understand I become the universe. And the universe doesn't disappear, or the Tao doesn't disappear. So the more I become part of everything there is, the more the fear of death disappears, because I will always be part of everything there is. I am part of everything there is. We all are. So that's what he's saying. Then he says, you were born in human form, and you find joy in it. Yet there are 10,000 other forms endlessly transforming that are equally good, and the joy to those is untold. The sage dwells among those things that can never be lost, and so he lives forever. Okay, that's the end of what I want to say. There's still 10 minutes if there's anything anybody wants to say or discuss or to ask.
Can you just tell us your email address?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, peter@jcm.co.uk. So if you want the notes, email me, and it'll be a while because I'll wait till I get all the emails and then I'll send them out. peter@jcm, that's Journal of Chinese Medicine, jcm.co.uk. I think really, how long have you been practicing? How many? 12? Okay. Well, you've had a lot of experience. I mean, don't you get a sense? Remember, who was it said, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, all your problems look like nails. Not everything's an acupuncture problem. So we have to get a sense, it comes from experience, what we can offer with acupuncture and actually what's beyond our scope. And if it's beyond our scope, we might refer on. As Bob Dylan says, tell me where it hurts and I'll tell you who to call. So we may refer, yeah, some people I definitely would refer.
And would you kind of, do you feel that acupuncture adds to that? Would you keep, to get the see that they can work together?
Yes, I think so, yeah. Yeah, I do think so. Yeah, can facilitate the process. We can't substitute for it. And, you know, not everybody's going to do that. To do therapy requires a lot of ego strength and a lot of courage to do good therapy. I mean, you can do counselling, which is friendly and palliative. You do cognitive behavioural therapy, my God, which appears to achieve magic in 6 weeks. But I don't think it's very deep. So again, even if you think people should do therapy, who you refer them to, what level of work is appropriate for them might vary. Yeah.
Are you doing Qigong tomorrow morning?
Yes, 7 o'clock.
Is there a special place?
I don't know. In fact, Kevin's just come in. So where will we be doing?
In Qigong, it's going to be in the grass just here. This is where we're going to be having a little drinks reception later on after this session.
Living well and living long. It'd be great to listen to this. How do you help patients that are going through imbalances in their life because of hormones? So how do you help them cultivate and continue to maintain that when it may be perimenopausal, menopause symptoms that they feel they have no control over and is disruptive?
Well, that is a very big question. So you're talking about patients going through hormonal changes, and specifically you've singled out the menopause. My understanding, and you know, I know it's a really big, complicated subject, but I was always very impressed by some research I read that the incidence of menopausal syndrome, which is what you're talking about, is really different in different cultures. And that in cultures where aging is experienced as a loss of value, so in cultures that are more materialistic and put higher value on appearance and sexiness, then women experience much more menopausal syndrome. In cultures where women actually gain status through aging, and where aging is valued, you have much less menopausal syndrome. So that would argue it's not purely physical. So one thing I learned actually from my patients, and I don't want to make this a long answer, but the conventional Chinese theory of aging is the kidneys decline with age. And as women, take men first, as men age, their kidney yang declines. Right? So they have relative preponderance, relative excess of yin. So what does that mean for the male aging process? It means that as men get older, they tend to get softer and sweeter and kinder. Yes? So those kind of men who are in their 30s and 40s are actually a bit rough and like some of our dads, yes? Maybe a bit kind of fierce, turn into pussycats when they get older, become very sentimental. Yes? Is that true? Yeah, we observe that. So what happens to women? As women age, the theory would say their yin declines. And that can be seen negatively as the yin as a loss of fertility and a loss, all kinds of things. Okay? But of course, the yang relatively increases. So what does that mean for them? It means that when women go through the menopause, they have the potential to enter a particularly powerful time of life. Right? And actually, older women have always been understood in most cultures to be strong and tough. And women are kind of getting stronger and being more assertive and going outward into the world at the same time as their previously strong and assertive male counterparts are starting to retreat. So it's a positive vision. So all I can say is it's a shallow answer to a big question, but one can play with perceptions as well as really focusing on hormones. That's all. Yeah. Here you
I'm a great fan of the power nap.
yes.
But I didn't have one during your lecture, you should know that.
Okay. The nap I saw you have is just an ordinary nap.
So, that hasn't featured at all in your talk, and I'm just curious if you see it fits in and how it fits into longevity and so forth.
Well, yes, but I haven't covered diet and I haven't covered exercise because the focus here has been purely on mind and emotions. But yes, napping and siestas are very good for you. Very much to be encouraged. In fact, I'm missing mine. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. And yeah, Qigong at 7 if you want to.